Burgess, thank you. And on behalf of the opposition, I want to also welcome the reduction in the terrorism threat level in Australia. It's a very welcome piece of news, and it is a tribute to you and your team at ASIO, as well as your law enforcement partners and Home Affairs partners who work very collaboratively on that, and long may it remain the case. There was an observation that you made in your statement today, in your speech today, making this announcement, which you partially repeated in your opening statement there, which I want to zero in on, which I'll just briefly repeat for the sake of clarity. You said there's one important factor I want to emphasise. The reduction in the threat level reflects the maturity of Australia's counter-terrorism frameworks, laws and resourcing. Australia is a safer place not only because of the actions of my organisation and our partners in law enforcement, but also because of the decisions of successive Commonwealth and state and territory governments. However, it's important to note that our assessment assumes there are no radical shifts in these policies, processes, laws or investments. That's a very timely warning. I agree with you. It would be very unfortunate if any of those were changed because they've been proven to be successful. I just want to confirm that in the May 2021 budget, ASIO got an additional investment of $1.5 billion. Is that right?
$1.25 billion, Senator.
Thank you for the clarification. What is the purpose of that investment?
So that investment is our capability. It's broken down into the major portion of that is a 10-year investment in the capabilities that allow ASIO to, in our language, collect the dots and make sense of the dots we collect, to join them together so we can identify and manage threats to security. Another portion of that is just the ongoing operational expenses of the Ben Chifley building. But the majority of that funding is investments in our ability to collect and connect the dots.
And you've already started deploying that investment. Have you seen benefits of that?
So we already have started deploying that investment, designed deliberately in the early years, setting up the foundational work that will see mission benefits in the outer years, but not 5-7 years from now. But so we're well on the path there. Like most organisations in a low unemployment market, we have trouble with some things, some skills are in short demand, but we're managing that program well.
And just confirming that increased investment from the 21 budget hasn't been changed or reduced in any way in either the March 22 budget or the October 22 budget?
That's correct, it's unchanged.
And how concerned would you be if in the future it was cut or was reduced in any way?
I would be concerned, of course.
And if it was repurposed for any other project within the NIC, for example, it would detract from the job that ASIO has to do?
I think, Senator, the way to answer that, obviously our budgets are set by the government of the day. What the money, if we were to receive a cut, where it went, that would be a matter for government. I think I've got a pretty strong case for ASIO to continue investment in its capabilities it needs, but I'd recognise it's a competitive environment for money, and colleagues across the community who have equal arguments for investment in their capabilities as well. Yes,
I would agree with you. They have some very compelling arguments, but I would hope that any additional investment doesn't come at the expense of any other agencies within the NIC, and that it be additional, because, as you've outlined, the threats that we face are very serious.
They certainly are, Senator.
Moving on to a second topic, you probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to hear it, but I was asking the Department of Home Affairs about the Chinese surveillance companies Hikvision and Dahua in light of the decision of the UK government to ban it from government buildings, and the light of the decision of the Federal Communications Commission in the United States to also substantially ban them in the United States. Does ASIO have any Hikvision or Dahua equipment at any of their facilities?
I don't believe we do, but I will actually take that question on notice.
I would be surprised if you do as well. Have you provided any advice to other agencies or departments of government about risks posed by companies like these?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator. Of course, I understand where you're going with your concern, and I would share with you the concern of nothing wrong with the technology. It's where the data that it collects and where it would end up and what else it could be used for would be of great concern to me and my agency.
Yeah, indeed. That is my concern. As the relevant UK Government Minister, Oliver Dowden, told Parliament, the cameras are produced by companies subject to the national intelligence law of the People's Republic of China, and that means that the data that they collect could be accessible in mainland China and therefore handed over to the Chinese intelligence agencies. In the discussion with Home Affairs, they acknowledged that, save for an exception, they don't have them at their facilities, and they agreed with the concerns that the UK government and the US government have articulated. but they weren't aware either of whether advice had been provided to any other government departments and agencies about this. It seems to me to be a gap in the market. Your organisation, Home Affairs, ASD, very sophisticated understanding these threats. Not every government department is going to have that same level of expertise. Why is no one providing that advice to other arms of government?
Well, it's a good question, Senator. I'm not sure I could answer that for you. Obviously ASIO is not in the rule-making business. Do I have concerns about such technology? Absolutely. So I would put that in the scale of what's the most pressing issue to deal with. 5G was obviously one great example of 5G will be at the top of this nation's list of critical infrastructure, and it was incredibly important to ensure there were not what is termed high-risk vendors in the 5G. Security cameras obviously collect a lot of data. It's an issue that perhaps someone should look into, but it's not front of mind for me and my organisation at this point in time.
Fair enough, thank you. Moving on to my third and final topic. The Insulum appeared before Senate estimates a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him about his scheduled review into the espionage and foreign interference legislation. And he said, and this is not a criticism of him in any way, that in his judgment it's not likely he's going to be able to complete that review within his term, given other pressing priorities he has and direction he's received from government to prioritise other investigations. That means it's possible that laws which passed in 2018 won't be reviewed until 2024 or beyond. Do you think it's important that legislation like this passed by the Parliament is reviewed to assess its effectiveness?
I would agree. It is useful to review laws, but to test whether they were, have delivered the outcome that was expected by Parliament when those laws were passed by Parliament. But there are many ways in which reviews can be laws. One of the laws can be reviewed. One of them is through Insulum. Of course, there are other ways. My focus, however, would be on the changes or the implementation of the espionage and foreign interference laws that actually allows the Counter Foreign Interference Task Force to focus on dealing with foreign interference. It's one important tool. Aside from that, I'm confident the work of the task force and the work of my agency has done much to advance our understanding of the espionage and foreign interference threat and actually reduce the harm considerably, independent of any review of those specific legislation.
Thank you. No, I entirely agree, but the Parliament obviously had a clear intent that this review should take place because it wrote it into the legislation that the Insulum should do it, and now we've identified the Insulum is not going to be able to do it in a timely way. I also agree with you that there are other ways to do this. Another avenue would be for the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security to review it. As you may be aware, the PJCIS is already reviewing the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme, which was a partner scheme introduced at the same time, and I think you've given evidence previously that they were designed to work in tandem or in concert. Is that an accurate reflection?
That's correct.
Yeah. Would you have any concerns or objections if the PJCIS were to take on a review of the espionage and foreign interference legislation alongside or in addition to the FITS legislation?
I would have no issue with that. Of course, it's not a matter for me to determine what the committee chooses to or the government wants reviewed in that way.
Yeah. One of the policy issues that we're dealing with in the FITS review is that there's potentially some conduct which falls between these two chairs, that the foreign interference one hand, which is kind of quite hard-edged and malign, and foreign influence, which can be benign. There's a whole range of conduct that falls in there. Are you concerned that that's a possibility?
To be honest, Senator, I haven't given that much thought. I don't quite see it that way. So if you're able to share an example, as I've said previously, the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme is about, if you want to lobby, register in that context, be open about it. That's welcome in our country. The transparency is the key. Espionage and foreign interference is the harder penalties for those who choose to interfere in our country covertly, clandestinely, deceptively, in a way that's counter to our national interests, and there's the hard edge of the law backed up against that, which is one avenue by which the problem can be dealt with. That works fine. The more pressing or area of concern that I think needs some thought is the covert. Sure, it's pretty clear what it is, and we and the AFP are very effective in dealing with that. It's more we're a nation that's free and open, and we're happy for people to transparently tell us what they think. Foreigners are welcome to do that as long as they're open about it. Of course, that's influence, but is there a malign influence? Things that are happening that we don't quite understand are detrimental to us, and we haven't thought about it, or we're not alive to the plot behind that influence. It might be open, but it might be counter to our national interest. That's probably worthy of some more thought by our society.
Yeah, well, that's in fact exactly what I was alluding to, and I think one possible case study that illustrates this is Alex Joski's recent book, Spies and Lies, which examines the United Front Work Department and its relationship with the Ministry of State Security. As a policy issue, we've often thought of United Front activity, given that it is openly linked to the Chinese government, as falling under the influence arm. But Mr Joski, I think, quite convincingly argues that, in fact, behind most United Front activities is a Ministry of State Security handler, in which case this is influence, which is malign in nature and directed by potentially a foreign intelligence agency.
I'd suggest if we saw a link between a foreign intelligence service and an organisation like the United Front, that would fall in the category of foreign interference, and we would deal with that effectively. Okay.
Good. I will very much welcome that. Just finally, the question of cyber-enabled foreign interference has emerged as a real issue in recent times. I'm particularly concerned about the Australian Strategic Policy Institute report a few weeks ago that talked about how journalists and researchers and activists who are working on human rights issues in China, particularly relating to Uyghurs in Xinjiang, have been targeted for very sustained, personalised harassment and intimidation, clearly an attempt to silence them. Do you see it as ASIO's responsibility to deal with cyber-enabled foreign interference in that way?
In that context, cyber is a vector, so it's the means by which someone can intimidate, bully or harass someone. If it's foreign interference, and ASIO is heavily involved in that.
Are there adequate currently legislative frameworks that allow ASIO to deal with that, particularly if this activity is being sponsored or coordinated offshore, but taking place effectively onshore on Western social media platforms, for example?
So ASIO has a role in that, yes. Dealing with that would not just be ASIO, of course. I think the Minister of Home Affairs has spoken about how you actually, those who are running social media services and the role and the responsibility they have ensuring those platforms are used for open and free and non-harmful things, not for bullying or intimidation. They have a role to play. I'm confident then where we see it, we're able to assess the threat, not always able to do something about it, because if it's a foreign platform that's coming across on the internet, then we don't have the reach to do that.
Indeed, and that's a particularly acute concern with platforms that are headquartered in authoritarian countries where we have very little influence.
That's correct. Of course, we have the ability to not consume that content and not be taken by it, because knowing what it is.
Thank you. I'm limited in time and I want to share the call with my colleagues, so I will look forward to discussing these issues with you probably in more depth at the Senate Select Committee on foreign interference through social media.
I look forward to it, Senator.
Thank you.